Our veterans are willing to sacrifice their lives to keep us safe. For those who make it home, the psychological sacrifice can be greater than ever. According to the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department, an average of 17 veterans died by suicide every day in 2020. Nearly a quarter of those heroes suffered from PTSD. But a solution to treat their trauma is emerging. My dear friend, NBC correspondent Harry Smith has more on this extraordinary story.
The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are quickly fading into history. But for veterans of those conflicts with PTSD, history feels like yesterday.
We spent most of our time outside the wire, walking around, driving around, getting shot at and blown up.
Marine veteran Scott Ostrom did 2 tours in Iraq.
How hard was it to come back?
When I first got back, I thought it was par for the course to have nightmares and be sleepless.
Ostrom describes 12 years of hypervigilance, every waking hour on edge.
I was just constantly thinking about what I would need to do if something were to happen and how to be ready. And I was always armed. I always carried my gun with me.
Really?
Yeah.
The VA prescribed antidepressants and opioids with 0 results, he says.
Did you think about taking your own life?
Oh, yeah, plenty of times.
We lose almost a veteran an hour to PTSD and suicide.
But, says researcher Jennifer Mitchell, help for treatment-resistant vets may be close at hand. Psychotherapy in conjunction with MDMA, a psychedelic drug better known as ecstasy.
So over 71% of the individuals that received MDMA-assisted therapy lost their diagnosis of PTSD by the end of the study.
She says FDA approval for the therapy could come as early as next year. The drug, says Mitchell, opens the patients to self-compassion, to catharsis.
They were able to finally revisit a very deeply seated emotional memory in a way that allowed them to untangle and work through their trauma.
It worked for Scott Ostrom.
All those walls that I had built up over the years just dissolved.
Did MDMA save your life?
MDMA gave me a new life, one that's more worth living and one that I feel more comfortable in my own skin.
Ostrom has quit drinking and stopped using other drugs.
Other veterans that you know, when you tell them about this, what do they say?
How can I sign up?
And my dear lucky audience, Harry is here with us. Harry, I'm so honored you're here. You've done many, many stories on veterans. What was this one like for you?
You know, it's interesting because I talked to Scott a lot about all the different therapies he's tried. I feel like I've covered those over the years. I mean, there are all kinds of amazing veteran programs. They take guys out fly fishing. They try to find ways for people to get out of the basement because people come back and they shut themselves off to their families. They shut themselves off to what is normal life, their children. None of these things work for Scott. Often it's the same story for a lot of other veterans. And this guy said, I was so tired after 12 years of this constant vigilance. Somebody told him, there's this study going on, it's on Facebook. This was 5 years ago. He's been better for 5 years. And once you do the MDMA, that's it. It's done. It's not like, oh, I have to go back and have some more.
Have you ever seen any kind of response like this to PTSD?
No, no. And it's interesting because years and years ago, I was on the marijuana beat for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, were you? What does that say about you, Harry Smith?
It's just I'm interested. And I'll never forget, we talked to a veteran who was self-medding with marijuana. With cannabis. And he told me the same story that Scott did. From the VA, they get these giant plastic bags, barbiturates, opioids, just you name it, antidepressants. And he says, the guy in the marijuana story just threw him down on the floor. He says, I don't use any of that stuff anymore.
Now, Scott and his friends were not afraid to try this. They were ready to dive right in?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of these guys do a lot of different kinds of self-medications and do a lot of in Scott's case, he said, I made plenty of bad decisions over the years. So when this thing came along, it was just, for him, he said it was a no-brainer.
It has been over 20 years since the FDA has approved a new treatment for PTSD. Why is this taking so long? It's killing some of the most important Americans.
So you think about something like MDMA, methamphetamine, it becomes a Schedule I drug in the 1980s. And once something becomes a Schedule I drug, it gets really, really difficult to research. The barriers to research are extremely, extremely high. So it's only in the last couple of years that that door is finally opened. In this case, there's an organization called MAPS, which has been around since the 1980s, which has been really interested in nonprofit, interested in getting this into a place where it could be actually researched. So this has been fast-tracked. If they get all this research done, all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted by the end of the year, this
by
could
the end
actually,
of this year.
End of this year, it could become available for therapeutic use in 6 months.
For veterans and non-veterans as well?
Anybody.
Wow.
Yeah. The incidence of PTSD actually about 5% in the country, and about half of people are pretty resistant to normal treatment protocols.
You like telling the story.
Well, it's just so fascinating, right? It's just these kinds of things are, listen, the great thing about our business is we get to learn things. And on a subject like this, there's a lot to learn.
Extraordinary. Thank you so, so much for coming here. I am grateful. Our audience is grateful. And I'm happy to see Scott doing so well.